Welcome to the Penn Theater. I am your host, aspiring author Chloe Chrisman. And for our pilot episode today, I decided to have a Christmas kickstart for the holiday season, and what better story to talk about Christmas spirit than A Christmas Carol?
Not great!
A Christmas Carol was published in 1843 in London, England, and in 1928 it became public domain, which is why there are so many different modern adaptations of it, from talking animals to horrific, nightmarish computer imaging cartoons, and even inspired by sequel remakes. You heard me. We are talking today about Spirited. First on our list is a Disney classic, Mickey's Christmas Carol, released in 1983. In this telling of the story, old-time Disney did what it did best. It took a serious story, fed it through a Disney puree blender, and spat out a happy animal gathering. Warm and cozy and fuzzy. Very fuzzy. Don't get me wrong. Disney's Mickey Christmas Carol is a charming adaptation filled with beautiful artwork, delightful Easter eggs, and decent humor. It's even the version of Christmas Carol that first inspired my love for the story. Yet, for all of its Christmas charm, the half-hour short lacks much of the hauntings and in fact has a rewritten ending. In the original source material, Scrooge did in fact purchase the largest turkey available for the Cratchit family, but he had it delivered anonymously and spent Christmas Day attending church, giving to the poor, and having dinner with his estranged nephew. It was on the following day, when Bob Cratchit arrived late for work, that Scrooge pretended to be upset only to surprise Bob with a raise. Although inaccurate, Disney's ending does have a sweet charm to it that comes from seeing Tiny Tim and his siblings open up surprise presents. Honestly, though, the ending was most likely just rewritten this way to give Mickey Mouse more screen time. Yeah. Second on our list is 2008's A Barbie in a Christmas Carol. With an entirely gender-swapped cast and basically rewritten storyline, Barbie stars as Eden Starling, an entitled opera singer. Unlike the House of Mouse's first edition of the tale, Barbie dug deeper into the emotional abuse Eden suffered from her primary caregiver, Aunt Marie. Originally written, The Ghost of Christmas Past showed Scrooge his early childhood, where he in fact spent many Christmases year after year alone in boarding school, because apparently his dad had extreme anger issues and did not care for his son. It wasn't until years later that his father softened when he was a teenager and his sister, Fanny, came to retrieve him for Christmas. Barbie's version strongly expressed the emotional abuse of child neglect and its lasting effects. However, Ghost of Christmas Past didn't show any memories of Eden with a failed relationship, making this one of the few Barbie movies to depict Barbie as entirely single. In my own opinion, Barbie in A Christmas Carol is far from a quality retelling of Dickens' work. The primary reason being that Catherine Beadnell, our Bob Cratchit here, fails to remain an empathetic character. Catherine is written far more headstrong than traditional Bob Cratchit, leading her to be more defiant of Eden's demands. Of course, there is nothing wrong with having self-confidence, but letting it take over your personality is a bad thing. Just saying. Like Bob Cratchit, Catherine is a generous person caring for a sick child and almost always taking the high road with another Scrooge-like antics. But when the orphanage she volunteered in shuts down and Tammy, our Tiny Tim character, is presumed dead, Catherine lets her bitterness consume her, becoming just as heartless and self-centered as Eden previously was. Another thing I just didn't like about Catherine's character was that she witnessed a lot of Eden's abuse as a child and never once defended her. Now, of course, children are obviously unable to stand against adult abusers, and that makes sense, so she's not at fault for this. She's not at fault for what happened to Eden. But later on, when with fellow coworkers, she sees them belittling and making fun of Eden behind her back, she joins in and continues to talk terribly about Eden behind her back. to be fair, Eden was terrible to everyone, but also you think that Catherine would sit down and have a conversation with her about it instead of acting this way because she knows parts of Eden's trauma. Third on our list is 2009's A Christmas Carol, Disney's second attempt to adapt this story into cartoon. It's like they went from Disney puree to Disney gruel. This adaptation is the most by-the-book version I have ever seen. I would give this movie a 9.9 out of 10 rating for accuracy. Even all of the dialogue comes straight from the source. The only inaccuracies in this movie would be a few of the hauntings were cut, either because they were deemed unnecessary or to save time. And the over-dramatization depicted in the ghostly travel, kind of inaccurate. I feel like scenes such as Scrooge shrinking were depicted in this story at the request of the director or writer to give the movie more moments of conflict. Truthfully, I think the added conflict provides little to no plot development, but hey, it speaks to the humor of the creators of the movie.
Was the best he had.
Mrs. Gilbert!
Would have been wasted only for me.
You're fired!
Authenticity aside, this movie has terrifying animation. You think they would have learned not to do this to us again after Polar Express, and yet they did. Early CGI attempts to create lifelike animation produced the real Nightmare Before Christmas. But hey, the animators were barely learning this adapting style. It's not your fault, Jim Carrey. Your voice acting was beyond perfect. Last but not least is 2022's Spirited, starring Will Ferrell, Ryan Reynolds, and the lovely Octavia Spencer. What makes Spirited such an interesting take on the classic story is that it's not another mere adaptation. Spirited expands the story into the world of ghosts to go on and talk about how and why holiday hauntings take place. Basically, Spirited is a type of sequel, but since it's not written by Charles Dickens, it's not considered a true sequel, which is why I like to call it an inspired by sequel, which is honestly kind of amazing. Inspired by sequels are wonderful at bringing dusty old stories off the shelf and into the modern light without disrespecting the source material. They do this by bringing back a few of the classic characters and introducing a new batch of characters in need of lessons from those who have gone before. In this case, Ghost of Christmas Present becomes obsessed with haunting and redeeming bitter marketing tycoon Clint Briggs because Clint reminds him of Ebenezer Scrooge. The extra fun twist, spoiler alert, is that Christmas Present is in fact Ebenezer Scrooge. Since he passed away before he could do as much good as possible, Ebenezer spends his afterlife trying to redeem others before their time is up. This is a fun twist that expresses how Scrooge changed for the better because of his want to serve others. The only way I'd say this movie doesn't respect the source material would be that it depicts Jacob Marley as a free ghost instead of being weighed down by the chains of his greed for all eternity. Kind of defeats the purpose.
You sit on a throne of lies.
Having Jacob Marley as Clint's Marley experience makes the haunting ineffective to both Clint and the audience. The point of the first ghost's warning is to personalize the fear instilled in the Scrooge-like character. Clint even makes fun of Jacob and questions why he should care. The redemption process for Clint would have been better if it had been his mother who had come to see him and warned him not to live the way she had, just like Aunt Marie in Barbie's Christmas Carol. Since the movie has two Scrooge figures, the storyline is split between them, giving the family abuse and neglect to Clint, while the broken love story regret remains with Christmas Present Scrooge. When Christmas Present tries to show Clint where his ex-girlfriend Nora is in her happy life, Clint calls out Ebenezer, claiming that he is pushing his fantasy of building a family onto him. I did find this to be rather clever and poetic, since in the original source material it showed that Christmas Present showed Ebenezer where his former love was living a happy, simple life, and this became his biggest regret, and he could no longer bear to look. Clint, however, doesn't regret his breakup more than he regrets failing his own sister. When Carrie Briggs was dying of cancer, she asked her brother Clint to raise her daughter, Wren, who is both our Fred and Tiny Tim character for this movie. Clint can't handle the intense emotion and immediately denies his sister's request, probably the only request she's ever made of him. Wren is then raised by her other uncle, Owen, and Clint continues to neglect her as Scrooge neglected Fred in the original story. Speaking of Scrooge, Christmas presents, Ebenezer sees and begins to fall in love with Clint's assistant, Kimberly, our Bob Cratchit character. Unlike original Bob Cratchit, Kimberly does not have a family or terminally ill child relying on her, but she did come from a struggling financial background and has the same kindness as Bob Cratchit. She's even fearful of speaking against Clint's Scrooge-like antics at first. I like Kimberly's character a lot more than Catherine's because she embodies Bob Cratchit's kindness while learning to stand up for herself. She goes as far as to quit her job digging up dirt for Clint's business, not only for her own self-respect, but also for the well-being of others. I genuinely love the movie Spirited because it embodies the power of the original story, A Christmas Carol, while respecting the source material and expanding on it. It is a great movie with amazing music and hilarious comedy that still manages to teach the importance of compassion and the joy that comes from serving others. And if you don't like the movie, all I have to say to you is, good afternoon. Okay, fun fact, that joke actually exists because in the original book, when Fred comes to invite his uncle to Christmas dinner and Scrooge runs out of mistakes, he just says to him, good afternoon, over and over again, trying to awkwardly end the conversation. The makers of this movie really did go above and beyond just to make fun of the littlest thing. But for now, that's all the spoilers I have for you. So if you want to learn what happens in this movie, I guess you'll just have to go see it yourself. Thank you for joining me today in our discussion of A Christmas Carol. If you'd like more holiday spirit, please like and subscribe and join us next week for another holiday episode. Comment below to tell us what books you think make the best movies. See you next time.